Okay, yeah, anytime.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're very happy that you are here tonight, and I hope that you have everything that you need. We've got some notebooks and pens for you if you want to take notes. There is coffee and water and tea, and I'm really excited that we have Ryan here to teach. Ryan, if you don't know Ryan, well, we've kind of served together in kids ministry for a number of years. And Ryan is just an exceptional teacher. He has such a heart for people to understand who God is and his word. And one of the things he's very excited about is apologetics and people really understanding and having language to have conversations with people who have really hard questions. And you've taught this class online.
Yeah, we did.
Share that.
Yeah, we did twice in person before COVID, 3 times online via Zoom during COVID, and now number 6, we're doing hybrid. We got people here, Zoom over here, so it's a new thing, but I think it'll work well.
Yeah. So Ryan, your work life involves what?
I run a video game development company. So that is my day job, making video games. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of programming, game design. I'll talk about this a little bit when I go in because it's kind of related to apologetics, but I create worlds, virtual worlds, but worlds nonetheless. And yeah, I use math and computer science to create those things. Yeah.
2 beautiful little people.
Yeah, 2 kids, 4 and 2. So yeah.
And his wife's name is Erin.
That's correct. Yeah.
So have any of you met Ryan before?
Some, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So I promise you that you will learn a lot in this class. And from a formatting standpoint, if people have questions, are you okay to take those questions? Or do you want them to
No, absolutely. Just pop your hand up and we'll answer your questions as we go.
Very good.
Yeah.
So a couple of reminders of some things tonight. We have 4 different groups in the building. So we have this class. We have 1 community group that's in the nursery, 1 community group that's in the youth room, and 1 that's in the lower auditorium. So if you can see people kind of coming upstairs, that's why if they're looking for something, just so that you know that there's not walking through the building. Kevin is here to lock up tonight, but he's closing down 4 spaces for Sunday morning. So if you would be so kind tonight when the class is done to just stack your chairs on the rolling cart that's there. And the little white tables can just be stacked and put over there. You don't need your notebooks or don't want them, just leave them on the coffee bar and I'll take care of them. But that would be awesome. So you'd be able to help us with that. And before we get started, I just wanted to pray for you, Ryan, and for this group. So Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that we have this place together, that we have this building that's so full of different discipleship that's taking place, where people are learning more about who you are and following Jesus together. I thank you for souls like Ryan's that you have gifted and equipped to teach us and to share information with us that will help us to be better equipped to share more truth about who you are. And so tonight and throughout this course, Lord, would you just continue to use Ryan and work through him with what you have gifted and called him to do. And for the folks that are here attending this class, Lord, that this would just be an enriching experience for them, that they would feel comfortable to ask questions and to wrestle through some of these things that we have to wrestle through these days. So I just thank you for this place. I thank you for this time and ask that it be honoring to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, so now with that little introduction, a little bit about me, hopefully. But I thought I'd just tell you a little bit sort of about my sort of personal journey, how we got to this part, and how that kind of informs what the class is going to be about. So I've been a Christian ever since I was a little wee lad. My mom brought me to church and taught me the Bible. But it wasn't until I got to university that I really started to take it like really seriously for myself, And so I went to university to study mathematics and with a major in computer science, as I mentioned. And so, I'm starting to study, like I was always good at numbers, okay, in high school and math, right? But I was starting to understand now in university this idea of like mathematics as sort of this foundational truth to almost all of reality, right? Like you're starting to see science is all dependent on math. Like you don't get physics, you don't get chemistry without math. Statistics, economics, logical systems are all just a branch of mathematics. And everything was kind of just reinforcing this idea that everywhere you look, you're understanding it through this lens of mathematics, of rigorous analysis, not just of observation, but of some foundational truth that kind of undergirds everything. And now at the same time, I'm starting to study the Bible more seriously with the church I was at university. And this is a lot of the same kind of things now, right? But just sort of from another angle. I'm starting to learn about not mathematical truth, but sort of the same kind of truth that undergirds our reality. So a more metaphysical truth, right? But these kind of share a lot of the same language. They're dealing with sort of this absolute truth that sort of undergirds everything, that explains sort of everything, and everything is sort of built on this idea. And so these things really started to fuse in my life sort of around that time of university of math and logic and faith. And sort of the flip side of that is kind of what Dana was saying. My day job is a video game developer. This is what I always wanted to do since I was, again, very, very young. And that's why I went to university to study math and computer science. And so, for the last 15 years, I've been making games. And, so I'm not just making a game that people play, but I'm kind of like I was joking, I'm making worlds. I'm creating worlds with, imagery and environments and characters that have intelligence. And they are, navigating this world using the intelligence that I give them. And there's, music and audio and imagery, like everything we have in our world, I'm putting in this world. And, what I realized was when people play my games, they learn something about me. They learn what I enjoy, what I think is fun, maybe what I think is funny, maybe what I'm good at, what I'm bad at. If they don't like the game, they think I'm bad at it, okay? But either way, they learn something about me through understanding and my creation. And so I started to see a very, again, strong parallel between people playing my game and understanding that creation, understanding me through that creation, and us being able to look at our reality, to examine our reality, to understand something about the creator of this reality. Of course, God. And so when I approach this, ideas of faith or apologetics or thinking about these things, I'm often looking at it through the very rigorous mathematical analytical angle, but then also through this angle of like, what is the nature of creation? What is the nature of being, of intelligence, of purpose, of relationship of a created being and the creator? Right? These are things that I kind of deal with in my job, not as much in the philosophical sense, but just sort of in a very practical way. And one thing I do want to point out, so just a second ago, I had said, we examine our reality and we understand something about the creator of the reality, which sort of presupposes God has created reality. But one thing I want to make very, very clear while we're doing this class is actually we're going to build up an understanding of why we believe the things we do from the ground up, which means we're not going to assume that God exists. We're not going to assume the universe is created or designed. We're not going to assume any characteristics of God, not intelligence, nor will, nor power, nothing. So we're going into this with no assumptions. And we're going to show that we can build up an understanding of our reality, build up an understanding of our faith, literally from the ground up by examining reality through the lens of mathematics, science, philosophy, okay? And, I am not a pastor. I have not done, seminary training, theological training, biblical training. So we're not actually going to talk about the Bible all that much, to be honest, especially for the first half of the course, probably not almost at all. But again, the reason being because we really want to have this understanding of reality without bringing in the assumptions. Because if we assume God exists in order to examine the Bible, like we're kind of what they call assuming the conclusion, right? Like assuming the Bible is true and assuming God exists, then this is what we can conclude. It's like, well, you've kind of got a whole circular reasoning here, right? So we're actually going to, take nothing on assumption and just look at our reality and see what we can understand from it. And I think this is going to give us a very strong intellectual foundation because we can, when we're talking with others and sort of dealing with their questions or concerns, they may not, believe in God or the Bible. And so we don't need to appeal to that in order to, to reach them, okay? Any questions just initially before we kind of dive into some more stuff? All good? Okay. So when we think about, why do we even do this? Why am I teaching this? Why are we all here, I think there's a couple reasons, right? One is, I just said I'm not really going to talk about the Bible, but I will give us a verse from the Bible now, which is, in 1 Peter 3:15, it says, always be prepared to have a reason for the hope that you have, right? So people may have questions. Why do you believe what you believe, right? What about this, they may say, what about that? And as best as possible, it's good for us to have reasons and say, this is why I believe as I do, right? So let me tell you a story. One of the video game companies I worked at, the very first day, my producer, which is kind of like a boss, but like, I don't know if you've ever seen like the credits of a movie, it's like, executive producer and producer, like, they're kind of organizing things, okay? So he took me out for a breakfast burrito on my first day of work. And he was sort of explaining, his job, and he kind of was talking about each other. And he said, Ryan, my job is crutch removal. Crutch removal, he said. And he said, what I mean by that is people come to me with problems. Oh, I can't do my job. This person, they're bugging me, and I can't work. And he says, all right, let me fix that for you. I'll fix that problem. I'll remove that crutch. Now, what's the issue? Well, I need this from that person. They're not giving it to me. Okay. Let me fix that. Let me remove that crutch. Remove all the crutches. Now, what's the problem? Oh, nothing, I guess. Good. Go and do your work. Okay. And this is kind of what apologetics lets us do. If people have legitimate questions, well, I'm really wrestling because I don't believe in God because of this, or what about this I see in the Bible? We can, help remove those crutches. And when we do so, are they going to be like, okay, question answered. I guess I am a Christian. Jesus rose from the dead. Probably not. All right. But maybe they can then say, okay, you've answered my question. Now I'm going to actually think about it. And I will sort of, maybe read the Bible or engage in some way, right? But if they have sort of this intellectual stumbling block, they may just not be willing to engage. Okay, so it does help us answer people's questions and kind of get them to a place where they're, maybe emotionally willing to, to think about these sort of things. Another reason, though, very personal reason. So just over 10 years ago, my mom very suddenly fell into a coma and passed away the next day, very fast. And so when I was sitting in the ICU, I'll tell you, I did not feel very close to God. And I did not feel like God existed, okay? But the problem was, well, problem in quotes, the problem was I had so many logical reasons to believe, so many mathematical reasons, so many scientific reasons, philosophical reasons, that if I were to say, as some people do, well, that's it. In light of this tragedy, there's no God. No God would let my mom die like this. Well, then I would also have to throw out all of my mathematics, all of my science, all of my philosophy. And what conclusion? Like, that wouldn't make any sense, right? Because my faith was not only just an emotion, it was built upon all these logical foundations. So to just say, in light of this tragedy, that's it. I actually now don't believe all these mathematical reasons. Well, do I then just, hand in my degree in mathematics then? Like, where would that leave my whole intellectual foundation, right? And so when we start to analyze, our faith and sort of the world through this way, it kind of gives us this defense against kind of the highs and lows of emotion in our life, right? Sometimes we feel very high about things. Sometimes we feel very low. We're feeling good, we're struggling. But if you also have this other counterpoint of this intellectual foundation, it helps you kind of weather the storm, right? And so it's good to have both, right? The intellectual reasons, the emotional reasons, and they go really well hand in hand. Now, one thing you may encounter when you are talking to someone about your faith or about these ideas of God is right off the bat, they may just say, well, belief in God is irrational. And so anything you say is irrational. So why should I believe anything you say? Because it's all just irrational, okay? So one thing you may have to overcome right off the bat is this idea that faith is irrational. Let me give you a quote. There's a mathematician named Blaise Pascal. You may have heard of, if you've remembered any of your math, he's a pretty famous mathematician, Pascal. He was also a philosopher, theologian, a Christian, okay? And this is what he said about this idea of like faith being irrational. He said, people despise religion. They hate it and are afraid it might be true. The cure for this is to first show that religion is not contrary to reason, but worthy of reverence and respect. Next, make it attractive. Make good people wish it were true, and then show them that it is. Okay, so this is Blaise Pascal, a mathematician, sort of explaining the first step is to show people that faith is not irrational. Okay, and one really great way that he showed this is something called Pascal's wager. And I'm going to show this to you now. Before we get into exactly how he did it, I want to explain a little bit about the branch of mathematics he used to show it. So this is called decision theory, okay? And this is very heavily used in statistics, probability, economics. Computer scientists use this all the time for doing AI, okay? So the idea is, how do people or machines make decisions when they don't have all the answers, okay? Which is, I mean, a pretty common thing. Probably we make decisions every day without knowing all the answers, right? And so this is how decision theory works. So let's imagine that you want, you're sitting at home and you're watching Netflix or something, and you think, you know what? It would be great to get a coffee. I want to go to Starbucks and get a coffee. But you don't know if it's open. And I guess you can't check Google for whatever reason. So you don't know if it's open, but you really love a coffee. And so you think to yourself, should I go or should I not go? This is the big question, right? So decision theory, we have a little table here, a little 2x2 table, okay? And on top, we're going to put go. And this is yes and no, okay? So here's our decision. Should we go to Starbucks, yes or no? Now the unknown is it open? We don't know, okay? So we'll put that on this side. Is it open? Okay? Now, economics, when it's doing, sorry, won't block the screen there. Economics has this idea of utility, okay? And what that means is basically the value you get out of some outcome. So, and the numbers are not really measures of anything other than just how much you personally value this thing. So for example, we say, if I choose to go to Starbucks and it's open, I will get 100 utility. Now, 100 what? Well, it's not a measure of anything. Okay, the only value this number has is how it's relative to other numbers. So for example, if I don't go, I stay at home and watch Netflix, that's still pretty good. I didn't get a coffee, I still get to stay home in my comfy chair. Oops, so we're gonna call that 20, okay? So 20 is not bad, but we can see it's 5 times less than the coffee. So I really like that coffee, okay? So again, numbers don't mean anything other than how they relate to each other. And if it's, oh, sorry, this is, yes, no, okay. So if I don't go, actually it doesn't matter if it's open or not, right? If I don't go, who cares? It's 20 either way, because I just stay home and watch Netflix. Now, if I choose to go, but it's not open, well, maybe this is a bad experience. Maybe it's far and it's raining, it's a boring walk, whatever it is. So we're gonna say like -20. Okay, that was a very bad experience. Okay, so we've set up now the value we're getting out of the outcome. And the only last thing to decide is what are the chances of the possibilities? So just to make it easy, let's say it's 50% chance open or closed, okay? So 50% in decimal form is 0.5. And so now we can perform our decision theory analysis. So how it works is you multiply the outcome by the chance of it happening, okay? So our 100 value times 0.5, I'll kind of do it in a column here. So do it at the bottom, hopefully you can still see this. 100 times 0.5 plus a negative, I guess. So plus -20 times 0.5. And of course, that is going to equal 40, okay? So what this means is, obviously, any one time you go, it's going to be open or closed, okay? But over all times you're deciding to make this decision, it'll average out to 40 utility, okay? Similarly, we'll do the other way. And because the values of both 20 is actually going to just be 20, but I'll do it out anyway. Plus 20 times 0.5 equals 20. Okay, so we see, well, 40 is bigger than 20. Therefore, it's statistically optimal to always go. Whether it's open or closed, you don't know. But over time, if you go enough, you'll gain enough sort of utility out of it that it's statistically optimal to always go. Okay? Any questions about that? Yeah. You might just, depending on how much you like their coffee, this might just start going down. I don't know, but you know, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So assuming that makes sense, let's change this a little bit. And we're going to have an example with some bigger numbers. Let's say, should you buy a lottery ticket or not? Okay, so let's see. So I'll just change this to buy. Okay, yes or no. And we'll change this, it's not open, but you know, do you win? I guess I could have left the yes, no there, but okay, win.
So it's not buy and not buy. It's not comparing buy to not buy. It's comparing buying to winning.
This is like, so, okay, one second, hold on. Buy, win.
You know what I mean?
Sorry, I don't think I do know what you mean.
So,
Because like this is your decision whether you buy or not. And this is like sort of the outcome. So, does that make sense? Okay, all right. Okay. So we have control over the column. Okay, the rows we are outside of our control. So if we buy a lottery ticket and we win, let's say our value is like 5 million. We own $5 million. So just to make it easy, we'll say it's also 5 million utility. Okay. If we buy and we don't win, we'll say it's like -1. Maybe it cost $1. Okay. If we don't buy, then obviously the outcome is, you know, win or not. I mean, it doesn't matter. We didn't get the winning ticket, but we didn't pay anything, so that's 0. Okay, so what are the chances that you win? Well, I mean, it depends on, you know, how many. Well, I guess I was going to say it depends on how many tickets are bought, but I guess that doesn't quite true because they just pick a random number. But let's pretend it's not the lot. Let's pretend it's like a 50-50 draw or whatever. You know what I mean? Like where the outcome is maybe dependent on number of tickets or something. So anyway, the point being, maybe it's like 1 in 10 million. Okay, maybe like 1 in 10 million is the chance that you're going to win. So, I ran out of room. A lot of zeros. The point. Okay, it's a very low chance you're going to win. Okay, chance of not winning is pretty high, right? Okay. So let's look at this again. So let's do our multiplication. So 5 million times 1 in 10 million is going to be let's see, 5 0 0 0 0 0 0 times teeny tiny number. Okay, and then so that's going to equal 0.5 minus almost 1, right? -1 times almost 1. So -5 minus 1 equals -0.5. Okay, so -0.5 is the outcome here. Of course, we can see this is just going to be 0. So now, on any given lottery draw, you might win or you might lose. But statistically, you're better off not playing, right? Because over time, you will lose money. And I think this sort of matches our intuition, right? We kind of know how the lottery company's got to make money, right? You're obviously not taking more winnings than they're taking in, right? So hopefully this makes some degree of sense. So now let's look at how Pascal's wager worked, because his thing was not buy a lottery ticket or go to Starbucks. Should you believe in God or not? That's what he was wondering. Okay, so we're gonna just, but it's going to look very similar. So believe, yes, no. Get rid of these ones. And this will be, does God exist? Yes or no? And I mean, these ones we can almost like, well, I'll get rid of them just for the sake of making it clean. But anyway, okay. So now the interesting thing about Pascal's wager is you can give overwhelming numerical odds to the skeptic, and it's not going to change the outcome. So what are the chances that God exists? Like, we'll just say, for the sake of argument, it's like infinitesimal. So we'll just put, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I mean, you can put as many zeros as you want here. I don't know, how is that now? 15, 16, 20, okay? So you could say to someone like, is there a chance God exists? And I think if someone's intellectually honest, they will say, yeah, there's a chance, but it's like teeny tiny chance. Like, so we say, fine, that's fine. So the chance that God doesn't exist, again, is like, that tiny number -1. Yeah, you get the idea, right? Lots of 9s. Okay, if God exists, yes, and you believe, what's your utility? Well, it's infinite, right? You're in the presence of the source of all goodness and love and peace and joy forever. So it's like infinite goodness for an infinite amount of time. Sounds like infinite to me, okay? If you don't believe in God and God exists, what is your utility? Well, it's the opposite, right? You have the absence of all goodness and joy and peace and love for eternity. Well, that sure sounds like negative infinity to me. Okay. Now let's say you do believe in God, but he doesn't exist. Well, maybe that's still kind of good. You're kind of happy and sing some nice songs. It gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling. So we'll say like 100. That's pretty good. It's about as good as a Starbucks coffee. Okay, believing in God. And if you don't believe in God and he doesn't exist, well, maybe you can do whatever you want, right? There's no God. You're not accountable to anyone. So maybe that's worth like 1 million. Like that is pretty good. Okay. But now let's do our decision theory analysis. So infinity times a teeny, 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 tiny number, well, it's still infinity, okay? So you get infinity plus what's basically 100, okay? Well, that's still, infinity plus any number is still just infinity, okay? Similarly, negative infinity, teeny tiny number, well, that's still negative infinity, it doesn't change it. Plus a million, well, sounds pretty good, except it doesn't change the negative infinity, even though a million sounds pretty good. Negative infinity. So what Pascal showed was statistically, you are better off believing in God, even though, again, you don't know, right? That's what decision theory is about. You don't know. There's some uncertainty. What Pascal said was your statistically optimal, your statistically best outcome is to believe in God. Any questions about that? Well, I'm recording this, so you can show it to somebody. Yeah. Yeah. You know, yeah, like I've tried to simplify it, you know, just 4 boxes, but yeah, I mean, it does take a little bit to get there. But you know, if you think about it a little bit, like this is, I mean, it seems, you know, contrived because when we make decisions, we don't go on a whiteboard and draw a little box, but this is kind of how we make decisions, right? We think of what the outcomes are, the chance of it happening, and we kind of weigh in our mind which one seems like the best. So I will say, so what has it shown? Well, it's shown that faith is not irrational, okay? You know, Pascal did not do this and conclude like, therefore, obviously the Bible's true, look, right? No, he didn't say that. What he said was, look, faith cannot be irrational because we've got decision theory to back it up, right? So if you come at it from a question of decision theory, statistics, economics, you're going to come to the conclusion that belief in God is statistically optimal. So it can't be irrational. If you believe that's irrational, then again, kind of like I was saying about my mom passing away, you basically have to then say, well, mathematics is irrational then. Statistics is irrational. Economics is irrational. But is someone really going to conclude that? I think not. But then they have a little bit of a conundrum, right? Because they either have to conclude that faith is rational or explain why this is flawed. Now, on that note, I will say, if you were to, you know, Google this and look it up, you will find a lot of people saying this is flawed and saying it's very foolish. In my experience, you will not find mathematicians saying it's foolish because the math is very clear and very elegant and again, very applicable. There are mathematicians and statisticians doing this stuff all day, every day around the world. They're, you know, computer scientists, when they're programming machines to do intelligence, this is what they do. This is how they do it. A little more complex, but this is what it comes down to. So I really think that from a mathematical point of view, this is not refutable, even though you'll find people online that just don't like the conclusion. They'll say like, well, that's a statistically optimal is a bad reason to believe in God. And like, I can understand a little bit where they're coming from. Like, do we really want to say like, well, I love God because of statistics? Well, probably not. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair to say it's a bad reason, right? I mean, again, would someone say if they were weighing a job, okay, this job pays me this, and this percent chance of like maybe getting a promotion, and this job pays me that, I'm gonna, you know, do the one that seems the best, right? No one would say, well, that's a very irrational reason to pick a job. No, that's logical, that makes sense, right? That's how we make decisions. And I think, you know, to some degree, I think if we're honest, like humans are kind of like a little bit selfish, and I don't even necessarily mean that in a bad way, but like we're kind of good at thinking of what's good for us, right? That's kind of how society operates in a lot of ways. We pick the thing that seems the best, and sometimes maybe a little too selfish, but generally speaking, that's kind of how humans are kind of good at it. So I just don't know why it would apply to a job or to buying a lottery ticket or not, and not for the exact same math for something like this. Any questions? All good? Yeah.
When I worked in healthcare, we were taught to use this
Okay.
to make decisions.
Right. Okay. Perfect. See, that's exactly what I mean, right? Like this is real life. This is applicable. And again, if someone were to say, well, this is crazy, this is foolishness, well, then sure, I guess we'll just throw out the healthcare system. We'll throw out statistics and demographics and economics. That all can go in the garbage then too. Right? Like you can't dismiss this without dismissing the rest. And actually, this is going to come up a lot over this course. And unfortunately, I think part of the problem is that what we're going to find is that the skeptic worldview is actually quite full of inconsistencies like this, where it's perfectly fine to do decision theory for healthcare, but it doesn't make any sense to do it for this because of the implications of the conclusion, right? And so we're going to find out a couple of these. And sort of to that point, right, someone may say, okay, fine, okay. I guess your faith is a little bit rational. Okay, fine. You got decision theory on your side. But my beliefs, my worldview is more rational because I believe in science. And science is far more rational than your little proof here. Okay. So I'm going to erase this. Now, there has come this strange sort of belief has sort of crept in to the world, and I'm not quite sure why, but this belief that somehow faith and science are at odds. And I'm not really sure how this happened, because to me, it couldn't be further from the truth. And also, I don't really think it's reflective of reality. So for example, on Larry King a while back, there was the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you know, familiar with this guy, very famous astrophysicist, not a Christian, right? And he was asked, are faith and science incompatible? And he said, well, 40% of research performing scientists claim a personal relationship with some deity. 40%, he said. So in that sense, it's pretty compatible because almost half, believe in a personal relationship, okay? And again, he's not a Christian, so why would he has no reason to lie, no reason to trump up the numbers, right? He's not a Christian, has no belief, but that's what he said, 40%. And it's additionally strange for a couple reasons. Number one, historically, what we'll find, actually, contrary to what sort of pop culture will tell you, science has continually advanced the case for faith. Think back to like the year 50 AD, okay? So again, I won't even say according to the Bible. According to historical records, Jesus is off the scene, okay? He's been killed by the Roman authorities. And his followers are left, and they're spreading, the message about him. What scientific evidence do they have in the year 50 AD of cosmology? Nothing. They don't know anything. What philosophical arguments do they have? I mean, basically nothing. Like Plato and Socrates, or kind of, in somewhat recent memory, but still, like the whole even philosophical ideas at all are like very just nascent, right, in their infancy. What mathematical ideas do the disciples have? Nothing. Okay? Now, fast forward 2,000 years, we have so many arguments that I used to do 2 classes on it. And since the last time I taught this class, I've added 2 more. So I may need to do 3 whole classes on the arguments for the existence of God, looking at math and philosophy and science, because science keeps advancing. And one of them, the new ones I'm adding, comes from an article in Scientific American, okay? Not a Christian magazine. But secular scientists are doing the work for me. They're coming to these conclusions that make my job really easy. Okay, so it's just not even historically accurate that science is somehow like defeating faith or suppressing it or making it unnecessary. It's really strengthening the case. Okay, and additionally, if you look at the early scientists and the early people who made universities, okay, a lot of them were Christian. And it wasn't just like, well, we're Christian because that's the thing to do these days, right? It was that their Christian faith inspired them to do science. Now, again, we sort of have a trouble wrapping our head around this because we're sort of so far removed. But before the scientific method, before like the beginnings of science, people didn't even understand that the universe was comprehensible. Like that you could do experiments. That wasn't even something they understood. Right now, of course, we take it for granted. Of course, you can do experiments, you can do science. Like before the scientific method, that was a very foreign idea. But these early, sort of university founders, what they believed, according to their faith, was that God had made a universe of order that could be analyzed and examined because God was the God of order and intelligence. And that inspired them to see, can we make sense of this universe? Because before that, people just assumed it was incomprehensible. And even more modern, one thing Albert Einstein said, right? He said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. So again, we kind of take it for granted. It's weird to think that the universe would be incomprehensible and we can't really, study it. But this is like, if you kind of get down deep into the science, this surprises scientists. Why is it even comprehensible? Okay. And I'm going to give you another quote. This one is from the evolutionary biologist, Brett Weinstein. Okay, so again, this is not a Christian. Evolutionary biologist, not a Christian. And this is what he says about science. It's funny how often a scientist will tell me that they actually do their work with zero faith, but not possible. Because how do you know, for example, that you are not stark raving mad and that this room is not a fiction created by some part of your brain? If that were true, if the universe was something that you couldn't observe because you were either comatose and this was some sort of a dream state, or if you were the object of some sort of experiment where someone was piping in perceptual information into your jar, like this kind of philosophical idea that you're just a brain in a jar, right? In order to figure out what you would think in response, then you can't do science because the only thing you have to perceive is what's being piped into your jar. So in order to do science, you have to make the assumption, I am real, this is real, I can run experiments on it, I can evaluate what I see. Okay, so this is Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, not a Christian, saying it's nonsense to just say, well, I only do science, I don't have any faith. Because he says, at bottom, you don't know you exist. And it's kind of like what Einstein was saying. At bottom, how is this even reasonable? How can we do this? He had no answer. And what Brett Weinstein is saying is, yeah, you can't have an answer because you might not be here. Okay, which is a funny thing to think. But again, he's saying, if you really only believe what you can empirically demonstrate, well, that one's going to escape you. And this is actually kind of an old idea. So if you have ever heard of a guy named Rene Descartes, okay, he was a Christian mathematician, philosopher. At the very least, you probably heard something he said, which was, I think, therefore I am. And so what he was thinking about is like, what can we know for sure? Because he said, what if, okay, we think like 2 + 2 is 4. But what if, like, he used the word a demon. What if a demon is like, wiggling his fingers in your face and messing up your perception, okay? Now, I mean, he said demon, but like in philosophy, a demon is like more just like some interfering agent, okay? It's not necessarily mean like, pitchfork, whatever, right? Just some interfering agent, okay? And we might think, this is a weird, like, what is he talking about? This is weird, but like, so I wear glasses, right? So when I perceive the world, something is getting in the way of me understanding the truth. I need some like correction here, or the information I receive is being miscommunicated to my brain. Someone who's colorblind sees green, thinks it's red, right? Something is messing with their ability to understand the world. And so what Descartes said was, well, at least I have thoughts in my head. So at least I know I exist. Anything beyond that, anything requiring perceptual analysis, I don't know, right? Maybe I'm a brain in a jar. I know I exist because I'm thinking, but everything else, I don't know. I don't know how I would conclude that. So whether it's Descartes, Brett Weinstein, Albert Einstein, right? These guys are really coming up against this limit of knowability. What can we know? Okay. Any questions about that? Yes.
There's a lot of people that don't believe in Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
that believe in the concept of intelligent creation.
Mm-hmm.
I think as Christians, what we're asked to do is believe something totally illogical, and that's a resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
And our faith is based on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like, statistically, there's a lot of ways to verify that where we live here, this planet is created.
Sure.
What makes us a Christian,
Mhm.
is that we believe in this preposterous notion
Mm-hmm.
that Jesus died and returned to life
Mhm.
days later.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so very interesting point, and actually we're going to go into that a little bit more even tonight. But one thing to think about, so if you say to someone, well, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and they say, well, that's preposterous, like you just said. Why? Ask them, why? Why is that preposterous? Because the thing is, there's a book, I'll write it on here. There's a book called Tactics. Okay, the author is Greg Kokel. I think this is how you spell his name, Kokel, something like that. And what he says is, more often than not, if you ask someone why they think the things they think or say the things they say, they probably won't have an answer for you. So if someone says the Jesus resurrection is preposterous, why do you believe that? See what they say. And most likely they probably won't have anything to say because they probably haven't really thought about it beyond just that they think it's preposterous. I'll give you an example. He was on a plane and he was sitting beside a Muslim. And the Muslim said, or I think he was reading his Bible, whatever it was, and the Muslim said, oh, don't you know that the Bible's full of error, full of contradictions? And he said, oh, like what? And the Muslim was so taken aback, and he said, no one has ever asked me that. Right? He had nothing to say. He didn't know what was supposedly a contradiction, because all he had heard was people say it's a contradiction, and he just repeated it. So what Greg Kokel says in his book, there's a whole bunch of tactics for having conversations. One thing he says is ask questions. Ask someone, why do you think that? Because more often than not, they're going to do the work for you, because they're going to put themselves into a contradiction, whether because there's well, I don't know actually, or something to that effect. I mean, I'm not saying no one has thought of it, but most often, if you just ask someone how they came to the conclusions that they're telling you, they probably won't know. So that's what I would say. If someone says it's preposterous, ask them why. And I'm going to show you why it's not. So we're going to get to the flip side of that too. But that it's just one thing there. Okay, so continuing on this idea of knowability, part of the problem I think is that people don't really understand what it means for something to be true. And that might sound weird because well, of course we know what's true. Something is true if it's true. How else do you say it, right? We just intuitively understand it. But there's a few problems. So one, for example, kind of at the heart of what this is sort of called scientism, which is not just science. I love science, right? If I wasn't a game developer, the next career I was thinking was a quantum physicist. I love science, okay? So please don't see anything I'm doing as some bash on science, right? But we need to have a proper understanding of it. And scientism is when it almost becomes sort of this cult-like idea that science will lead us into all truth. Anything true, science will prove. Okay, so let me write this on the board, in fact. The statement, science will prove all true things, right? So because the thinking goes that, okay, sure, now there are things we don't know. Now there are some things we can't explain. But someday that won't be the truth. Someday all truth will be understood by science, they say. Okay. So now the question is this statement true? Because if this statement is true, then science would have to prove this statement to be true. If science proves all true things, it has to prove this. Well, science can't prove that, right? This statement is outside the domain of science. There's no scientific method that will demonstrate the truthfulness or falsehood of this phrase, okay? So the idea that science can prove all things is just, erroneous sort of right from the start, okay? And I'll show you a little bit more about kind of what I mean by that. There are different levels of truth, okay? So something is not necessarily, just true, but there's different sort of levels of it. I'll put a little heading here, levels of truth. Okay, the first level of truth is necessary truth. This is something that is true and could never have been false. Not in any conception of reality, whether a universe exists or not, this could never have been false. So what are some examples of necessary truth? Well, there's not many. Some mathematicians and philosophers think numbers are necessary truth. The idea of 2 would always be 2 in any universe, or even if there wasn't a universe, still 2 would be 2. Not like the symbol, not the word, but just the idea of 2, the idea of numbers. Some philosophers think that is a necessary truth. The only really other one would be God, the idea of a cosmologically necessary, self-existent being. Okay, now that was possibly a lot of words strung together, but basically we're going to show this again over and over. 9 times we're going to show it over my 9 arguments for the existence of God, that the universe cosmologically requires some necessary being. And this, and then, if you ever heard of St. Thomas Aquinas, who is sort of a very famous Catholic theologian, he is often would say, and this thing we call God. Okay, so he's not assuming anything, but he's saying, like, when you come to understand the need for cosmological necessity, he's like, that thing, that cosmological necessity is what we just call God. Okay, we're going to get to that more though. But God would be a necessary truth, right? His existence is true in any conception of reality. The next level of truth is axiomatic. Okay, what is axiomatic truth? Axiomatic truth is a system of truth that is based upon axioms. So this would be like mathematics. So in math, once you get down to the very bottom of math, you just assume that the axioms are true. This forms the foundation of math. And you might think axiom would be like, well, maybe like addition, like 1 + 1. In fact, the axioms are much simpler than that. Addition is proven. So you have these few axioms, and then from there, you build everything up like a tower. Everything is built on this system of truth. And now this is a very unique style of truth because it doesn't require observation. And this is really key for historical truth. We're going to see scientific truth. This requires your ability to understand and observe the world. It's what we call empirical. It requires an experiment, okay? Math does not require that, right? No one is in a math lab, right? It's just a person at a desk with a piece of paper trying to like plumb the depths of these axioms and come to understand something true. Okay, so there's no experimentation, there's no observation. They're just working with this little small set of rules and everything proven on top of that. So it's a very strong form of truth because if ever a mathematician proves something, no one disputes it. This is why I was saying about Pascal's wager. Mathematicians don't have a problem with Pascal's wager, right? It's not like in science, someone might do an experiment and then someone else tries to do the experiment too. And they're like, well, I can't reproduce the findings. Maybe it wasn't a peer-reviewed study, right? So it calls it into repute. Was it true? I don't know. It's controversial. We can't reproduce it. The sample size was too small. You made this error. Right? None of that exists in math. Okay, so it's a very strong form of truth. The next level of truth, and just to be clear, this is kind of going like from purity of truth of highest to like the lowest purity of truth. Okay, so this is underneath necessary truth. Next one we call contingent truth. Contingent truth is contingency and necessity are kind of go hand in hand. So necessary things are true and could never have been false. Okay, contingent things are true and could have been false. So the fact that we are here all here, right? It's true. We're here. We're in this building. It didn't need to be true. We could have stayed home. We could have done anything else. We can imagine a reality where us being here is not true. But in this reality, it is true. So it's contingently true. And we can possibly see that this is sort of a weaker version of axiomatic truth and necessary truth. Necessary truth is true in any possible universe and even without a universe. Axiomatic truth is sort of true, from the moment the universe began, right? When as soon as math was sort of entered into being. Contingent truth sort of has typically a sort of historical element to it, right? So it becomes true sort of at a moment in time. And before that, it's sort of indeterminate. Any questions about the first 3 levels of truth? Yeah.
About 20 years ago, every year they have a thing where they say that the new word of the year. About 20 years ago, the word of the year was truthiness.
Okay.
You can guess why that was so popular.
Sure.
It sounds true.
Yeah.
People were willing to take it.
Yeah.
Was the word of the year.
Do you remember all the other words of the year from then until now?
No, that's this one.
No, just that one. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Okay. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Okay. So now we've come to the 4th level, and this is scientific truth. Now, again, this is not to bash science, okay? But we have to have a proper understanding of what science is. And here's the thing. Science is not really intended to uncover truth. What science is meant to do is give us a model to understand reality. That is the whole purpose of it, okay? Let me give you an example. Gravity. Is gravity true? Well, depends what you mean by gravity, depends what you mean by true. Because when Isaac Newton came up with the idea, he thought that large objects attract smaller objects, and that's just the way it was. Now, that's wrong. That we know now that's not true, but it was very useful. We sent our rocket to the moon. That's how useful it was. Very useful. It had predictive power, but it was wrong. Okay. Later on, people thought maybe there's a subatomic particle called a graviton, and that's like causing gravity. Also wrong. Now the latest theory is Einstein's theory of relativity, that maybe large objects warp the fabric of space-time, and like the curvature of space is bent and things kind of follow the path of least resistance. And that's the best guess so far. But you see, like, it's not really getting to what is true. It's just how can we explain reality in ways that have predictive power? And I'll give you another example. There's a statistician named George Box, and he was very famous for saying, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And what did he mean by that? Well, if you can imagine in statistics, right, they're explaining populations and sort of how, demographics work. Well, any model, they say, to explain how a population behaves, right, is fundamentally going to be wrong, because it won't tell you really capture the whole truth. But it's useful because they can do stuff with the data. Another easy example, a map. If you ever use a map, is a map true? Well, not really, right? It's useful. It takes some data and shows it to you in a useful way, but it leaves out a lot of information. It's not true. It's just a good working model. And fundamentally, this is what science is about. It's about understanding like how to make predictions. I mean, that's even part of the scientific method. Scientific method, right, are things that are testable, observable, repeatable, predictable. That's the whole point of it. How can we understand and predict what's going to happen, right? It's a system. So you can maybe see, right, that's not really the same as these ones, right? Like a contingent truth is for sure like true or false. And we know that. Okay, we know we're here. Again, I mean, assuming we can know anything, okay, that's another philosophical idea, right? But we don't understand it's true. Mathematical truth. You see, in mathematical truth, there's no working model. Nothing is ever corrected. It just is proven, and that's the end of it. And there's no experiments. We don't need more data. We don't need a better microscope to, crack open a new type of particle, right? It just is true. So I hope you can see that we're starting to kind of get away from ideas of very firm, uncompromising, black and white truth. And we're really getting into more like, again, just ways of understanding and describing reality. And so I hope we can, again, it's not to bash science, right? But I think we can possibly see that like it is different. And so when people look to scientists for truth, we have to be very careful and ask what they mean. Because, for example, if someone said, well, I don't believe, before I had that quote, science will lead us into all truth. Well, all contingent truth? Right? Can science tell us all historical fact? No. Can science tell us all mathematical fact? No. In fact, it's the other way around. As I mentioned, science uses math. Science is subservient to math in sort of like this systematized sense. So science cannot prove mathematics. So why would we think science will lead us into all truth? Right? It doesn't make any sense. And yet again, so this sort of concept of scientism is kind of bandied about. But again, it's not logical in the sense of what science is equipped to prove. There's a lot of things there's outside the domain of science. And again, it's really, I think, not even the point. The point of science is not even to understand true or false. It's to explain how things work in a way that's useful and has predictive power. And the very final one is just opinion. Okay? Which is something, pizza is the very best food. Right? That's true, in my opinion. Right? But we can see, like, we're also going again from some sort of universal idea, and we're starting to almost like collapse the scope, right? Again, this is true in all possible realities and no reality. This is true sort of in any given universe. This is true in a moment in time. This is like sort of not even really true in the same sense. And this truth doesn't even extend beyond our own brain, right? So we're really collapsing the scope of what this truth applies to. Now, you may have heard someone say, well, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Truth is relative, okay? Now, first of all, again, just like the idea of like, well, science will lead us into all truth. Basically, whenever someone says the word all, they're about to contradict themselves when it comes to this, like, sort of ideas of truth and philosophy. Because again, if science can prove all truth, it has to prove the truth that science can prove all truth. And if absolute truth, or if there's no such thing as absolute truth, then that statement either has to be absolutely true or not. So let me write it down here, right? So all truth is relative. This is a statement you may have heard, right? Another popular way to say it these days is live your truth, okay? All truth is relative. Well, is that true? Well, if it's absolutely true, then it is wrong, right? If this is absolutely true, then it's not true that all truth is relative, because the truth statement, all truth is relative, is absolutely true then, okay? And if this statement is not absolutely true, if it's only relatively true, well, then why should I believe it? It's true in your own brain only, right? So by the very nature of someone making sort of this exclusive all claim when it comes to ideas of truth, they're immediately going to hit a contradiction without understanding, like, basically necessary truth. It's going to lead us sort of into an idea of God every time. You can't escape it when you talk about this universality of truth. And we're going to see it again when we look at one of the arguments from God is the argument from morality and understanding, are there absolute standards of morality? So the statement all truth is relative is a paradox, right? It just cannot be true. Any questions about that or this? Good. Nothing over there? Okay. Yeah. This one? So what you can basically say, if someone says all truth is relative, you just say, is that true? And they have to answer you yes or no. So is that true? Absolutely true. Because then they'll have to say, I mean, that's a yes or no. If they say yes, they've just refuted themselves, right? Because you say, is this, because this is a statement of truth, right? So this is either absolutely true. It is absolutely true. Yes or no, right? Because this statement has a truth value. It's either true or it's false. And if they say, yes, it is absolutely true, well, then it just refutes itself because they just said all truth is relative. Does that make sense? I see you're furrowing your brow.
Isn't this what they call social license? And the problem with it is it's invading the school level at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're being taught. Circular reasoning.
I mean, well, yeah, it's circular reasoning. It's essentially a self-contradictory paradox. But yeah, I think people are being sort of taught it at a social level, yes, which is problematic. But how can I explain it? Yeah, so basically, even statements of truth can either be true or false, right? So it's talking about truth. It has the word truth in it, but this statement, this sentence, is either still true or false, even though it's talking about truth, right? So this statement is either true or it is false. And if it is true in an absolute sense, then all truth is not relative, because we have at least one example of truth being absolute, this one. And if it's not absolutely true, if it is relative, well, then why even bother believing it? Because then it's true for you and it's not true for me. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't extend any further than your own brain. Right?
Yeah, but if you say that to somebody, like you were saying, they won't even get what you're saying to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like,
That's where the entitlement comes.
Uh-huh.
Everyone has their own opinion. And
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what kids are being taught today, that they're all right. There's no wrong.
Yeah.
There's no moral standard. You see it spreading like wildfire, really, when you talk to people and the kids.
Yes, that's true. And a little while ago, I had said that the problem with sort of this skeptic worldview is that it's riddled with contradiction. And I don't even intend that to be a malicious statement. I'm not saying that people are intentionally going out to believe as many contradictory things as they can. But the problem is people will believe something like this, which, again, this has no, value in terms of like inherent like faith or religion or morality right? This is just a statement of logic, right? So again, this has nothing to do with God or the Bible. This is just this like, do you believe in logic and mathematics, right? That's the which people presumably do, okay? But this is what I mean. The problem, though, is that they believe this very self-contradictory thing, while at the same time lifting up the the ideals of logic and reason, right? And so this can be difficult to overcome because you have to show them like that the things they're believing are in contradiction to each other, right? And I'm not saying it's easy, but you can start to try to break down these barriers, but it can be hard. I had a friend of mine who I was studying at university with, so another mathematician, who said this to me: all truth is relative. This is a mathematician studying absolute. No, math is all about absolute truth. That's the whole thing. And he said this to me. So it's a pervasive thing, but it really is, to say, self-contradictory. Yeah. So really, and again, even forget about what I just said. Forget about this part here. Even just say like, okay, all truth is relative. So when you step outside, does gravity pull you upward? Well, no, of course not. So you're saying gravity, the truth of gravity, applies to all of us universally, right? Did you have a different physics than me? Do you have a different history? Was Napoleon defeated at the Battle of Waterloo for me, and for you, he was triumphant and went on to take over Europe, and we're all speaking French now? No, right? Like, you can tell, like, people don't understand what they're saying when they say this. What they are saying is opinion is relative. Well, of course, opinion is relative, right? But if you collapse all truth into just truth, then you lose the nuance, right? But no one believes scientific truth is relative. No one believes historical contingent truth is relative. No one believes mathematics, axiomatic truth is relative. No one, right? And so, yeah, if this seems confusing in terms of sort of like how I broke it down here, then just approach it that way. So is gravity relative, right? Is physics relative? Is history relative? Is mathematics relative? Because they'll have to say yes, 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 or refute themselves, right? So that's another way I think you can do it pretty definitively, I think. I don't think anyone would say that gravity works differently for them, hopefully. So yeah, hopefully that shows one other way to go about that. Any questions about this one then?
This is probably the oldest group you've ever.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I'm just saying.
Age is relative.
Yeah. I will tell you that most attendants of the class skew older, I will say. So actually, it's not even necessarily true that this is the oldest group, but well, again, it is a shame. And again, even forgetting about any religious angle to that opinion about it's a shame. It's a shame just from a logical standpoint, from a mathematical standpoint, from a standpoint of just understanding truth and reality. It is a shame that people try to conflate all of this into some relativistic, soup. So yeah, it is definitely a shame. Okay, let's see here. All right, we're coming up on 8:30. Okay, so I said part of this was in service of showing how scientism is a failing idea. Remember, if we go back a little bit, the sort of example I said was someone saying, okay, Pascal's wager, okay, fine, I guess it's rational, but I'm more rational because I believe in science. And I think hopefully what we've seen a little bit here is that actually doesn't make sense. You can't say, well, I believe in science to explain all of my reality, because you're only going to get this part of reality, right? You're leaving out this part of reality, which is kind of the important part in most ways, right? So again, scientism, that science leads you into all truth, is just very fallacious. But I think now we can come to the sort of death knell, as it were, for the idea of scientism. There was a mathematician, a Christian. You'll notice I'm saying that phrase a lot. A lot of mathematicians are Christian. Even today, I didn't really run the numbers, but I saw a study. Basically, of all sort of academic disciplines, the highest percentage concentration of Christians was in mathematics compared to any other discipline. Anyway, take that for what you will. So this is called Gödel's incompleteness theorems. Kurt Gödel is the name of this mathematician. Let me run out of room here. Incompleteness theorems. Okay, and his name was umlaut on that one. It was Kurt Gödel. Okay. So mathematician, he was a logician. So his job was logic, if you can imagine. That's a job, logician. Kurt Gödel is like number 1 or number 2, like most preeminent logicians that's ever lived. This guy is like held in hugely high esteem, okay? Mathematician, logician, Christian. He mathematically proved, okay? Remember, a mathematical proof, if you remember on the board here, is very strong, right? You cannot prove anything stronger than mathematics, okay? Not in our universe, right? He proved that there are things that are true, for sure true, okay? That are true, underline that, true, that can never be proven. Never be proven. I'll underline that. Never. This is, it's almost hard to even imagine. There's a mathematical proof of this. And I mean, assuming you're talking about some like non-trivial system, like the universe of the color of my marker here. Okay, well, that's black, and then we're done. Okay, but in any non-trivial system, mathematics, our universe, science, okay, there are things that are true, for sure true, that can never be proven. Well, scientism says the opposite, right? That science will discover all true things. He showed this. There's a mathematical proof. And again, remember, if someone proves something mathematically, no one disputes it. There's not a mathematician or a logician alive that does not believe this statement. They all know it is beyond repute. They know it's true. It's proven mathematically. And I mean, the end, right? I think of scientism, right? How can you believe in scientism and understand this mathematical truth, right? You cannot believe that science will prove all things. Even math cannot prove all things. And that was like right underneath the necessary truth. Even math can't do it, okay? And you may think to yourself like, well, maybe this is just like, some little logical theorem in the back of some dusty logic textbook that no one really uses. Actually, this comes up a lot in computation, because people ask the question, like, if we have a really powerful computer, what are the limits of that we can compute? Is there a limit? And there, in fact, are limits. And they use these theorems to understand what the limits of computation are. Another example, a couple of years ago, I was browsing the blog of Stephen Hawking, right? Very famous quantum physicist, okay? And I was actually looking for his thoughts on cosmology, on the beginning of the universe. But what I found is him talking about his theory of everything. Do you remember they made a movie about it, right? The theory of everything. He was trying to find one theory that unified and explained everything. And he wrote on his blog that he was giving up that search. They still made a movie about it, but I don't know. Maybe they didn't read his blog. He was giving up the search in light of these theorems. Now, these theorems are from the 1930s, so it's not like this is brand new. But he said it doesn't make sense to even try to find a theory of everything when everything can't be proven, right? There are holes in our reality. Now, so even if you think I'm making a mistake about it, again, the skeptic would have to also think that Stephen Hawking was wrong, right? And every mathematician on the planet, right? So probably, again, we have to ask ourselves, is the person who's skeptical of this, is their worldview consistent? Because they either have to accept this and accept the limitations of science, or again, believe that Stephen Hawking and every mathematician is off their rocker, right? Which they probably are not going to conclude. Now, one very, very interesting kind of bit about this is that, to be a little more nuanced, it's not true that necessarily that things can never be proven, but that they can't be proven within the system that they're in. Have you ever seen the movie The Matrix? Do you know the movie The Matrix? Okay, well, it came out like 2000. I'm gonna spoil it for you, okay? But the point being is there's a guy who's in a computer simulation and he thinks something is wrong. And he meets Morpheus, and Morpheus tells him, no one can tell you what the Matrix is. You need to see it for yourself, right? And he exits the Matrix, and it turns out the whole world is a computer simulation, right? So, I mean, Morpheus, I guess he could have told him, right? But for dramatic purposes, he said, like, no one can tell you, you have to see it. And this is kind of what this theorem is. Within the matrix, you can only prove things by the rules of the matrix. When you're outside of it, you can prove more things, okay? Now, I ask you, does this not sound exactly like a reality which contains a designer that is outside that reality, that can tell you things about your reality that you cannot determine for yourself? And we're going to go into this a lot in class number 4, or maybe 5, depending how long the arguments for this go. But this then is the purpose of the Bible. What is the purpose of the Bible? It's to fill the holes in reality that no amount of investigation can ever fill, right? We need someone from outside the system to tell us how things are. So yeah, I think, any questions about the Gödel's incompleteness theorems? All make sense, or possible?
Well, we couldn't.
Yeah.
We may not be able to prove it.
Well, you might not be able to prove the theorem or prove your question. Yeah. Now, again, kind of like Pascal's wager, if you tell this to someone who's not a mathematician, they probably won't believe you, because it almost defies common sense, actually, right? So I've had many conversations with friends of mine that are not mathematicians that tell me that's not what the theorem means. They tell me. Again, remember, they're not a mathematician. I don't even necessarily claim to be. I'm not the world's greatest mathematician or logician, okay? But I mean, I do have a degree in it. So, but the problem is, it's so counterintuitive in some sense that people really struggle to believe it's true. And they'll say, like, I don't believe that theorem is true. I think you're using it wrong. But again, right, it's not just me. Stephen Hawking, right, used this to abandon the search for the theory of everything. So again, kind of like Pascal's wager, kind of like we're saying about, absolute truth and relative truth, you may get pushback because people they really have to like kind of rewire their brain to try to understand what you're saying to them sometimes, because they've sort of been sort of bombarded by this idea that, just with a little bit of science, we will find out all the answers. Where again, Gödel proved in 1930s, almost 100 years ago. So again, not really that new, that is a futile search, okay? So again, right, remember at the start, I was saying, we're going to go into this class trying to understand our reality and understand an idea of God, of cosmology, of being, without using the Bible, without using any preconception. So far, all we've been talking about is basically math, sort of, what truth means. But I think what we can conclude is already something quite profound, right? We can conclude that we are statistically optimal by believing in God, right? So decision theory and statistics are sort of on our side. That science is insufficient to prove truth. That in fact, nothing will ever, there are holes in our reality that nothing, not science, not math, not philosophy, nothing will ever prove. And that we need, if we really want to understand reality, we need some information or some agent from outside the system to tell us how things are. That is the only way we will understand those things. And so I think we've actually shown a considerable amount about reality, about the idea of, God as this sort of like necessary being. Again, we're not yet at any ideas of like God as love or anything, okay? We're far from that. But I think we've shown a tremendous amount already. Let's see what I have else here. Right. Okay, so in light of these kinds of ideas, right? So what we're doing right here, as I say, is we're kind of right now we're clearing the kind of rubble and in the form of like miscommunications and sort of erroneous ideas out of our little foundation, so that next week we can start to build these ideas about the existence of God, looking at, like I say, cosmological necessity, the ideas of like contingent existence, okay, things like that. Using physics, we'll look at the Big Bang theory, we'll look at the laws of thermodynamics. Okay, we're going to come to a lot of stuff. We're going to build that up. But right now, we're just kind of clearing away these misconceptions about, the limitations of science, of knowability. Okay. And one other thing I would like to point out in this process is why we're doing this is we really want to go back to, again, this cosmological origin, because really the main question, the big question is, how did the universe begin? Right? This is the crux of it all, right? So some people will have disagreements or they won't believe in God. And one common one I hear a lot is, I don't believe in God because I believe in evolution. Okay? Now here's the thing. In this class, we're not really going to talk about evolution because actually it has no bearing on whether God exists or not even a tiny bit. Because the mechanism by which chemicals coalesce to form organisms, to form humans, okay, has nothing at all to say about how the universe began, right? And that is the crux of it all. Because let me do. I love my little decision theory table here. Let me do another table here. Okay. Okay, we'll put, this is not really a decision, but this is still going to be like a kind of matrix. God, does he exist? Does he not exist? Okay, evolution, true or false? Evolution. Okay. Okay. Yes. No. Okay. If God created the universe, could he have used evolution as a mechanism to form humanity? Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Why not? Okay. There's a part of me, the mathematical part of me, that kind of likes this idea, right? Like God very intricately, right at the moment of the Big Bang, set up the conditions for over billions of years, all life. Like, that's pretty brilliant. Okay. Now, could he have, if God exists, could he have done it with a snap of his fingers? Well, sure. And the game designer in me kind of likes that. God's like, boom, creation. That's kind of cool. But either way, it's fine. Okay. If God doesn't exist, could evolution be true? Yeah, sure. Right? That could be the natural mechanism by which things, I mean, we're going to find out, like, kind of no. But anyway, because the fine-tuning argument kind of calls that into question. But anyway, for the sake of this argument, we'll look at it. The only real one that can't be true is if God doesn't exist, could evolution not be true? Well, no, there is no other explanation then, right? I mean, maybe aliens made us, but someone made them then, right? They would have had to evolve, right? So really, if we look at our sort of possibility matrix here, the only contradictory outcome is God not existing and evolution not being true, right? So, but if God exists, it doesn't matter. It has no bearing on it. So we're not really going to talk about it. And I think to anyone who uses this, again, as an excuse, they're billions of years too late in their objection, because the universe has already been here before evolution started. So it just has nothing to say about it. But this comes up a lot, which is, kind of strange, because it really just has nothing to say about the cosmological origin. Any questions about that? All good. Anyway, it's kind of become this sort of like flashpoint in a lot of ways of debate of evolution, which I think is really quite unfortunate, because it really doesn't need, if ever someone says to me like, well, I don't believe in God and I believe in evolution, let's have a debate about it, I'll just say, yeah, whatever you believe is fine, let's just move on to the next thing, right? Because I probably won't change their mind, even if I were inclined to argue, which again I'm not. But even if I do, what have I accomplished? If I'm trying to share my faith, that hasn't done anything. Convincing that hasn't done anything, right? It hasn't actually gotten me anywhere to what's in the important part, right? So fine, they can believe that. It doesn't matter. Let's move on to Christ or any other more important part, right? That part just doesn't matter.
You may not want to move on.
Well, sure, and yeah, yeah.
But until you give them an explanation that makes sense to their reality,
Uh-huh.
they're going to keep hammering that.
It's very possible. But so it's interesting because in mathematics and philosophy, we typically let someone else define their terms, and then we argue within their framework. So in math, if someone says, okay, look, I'm assuming this and this is true, and now I will present my argument. Rarely would you go, wait, I don't agree with those assumptions. You'll say, all right, let's see your argument then. Because the point being is you want to show how their own logic leads to a contradiction in their own assumption. Right? That's how you show they're wrong. Showing that their assumption is wrong is probably usually a lot harder and not going to get you anywhere. But if you show them that their own assumptions lead to a contradiction, that's how you show them they're made an error. So in mathematics and philosophy, this is just well understood. If someone says, this is my assumptions, now I will present my argument, you say, okay, fine. So that's kind of why I say it too. If someone says evolution is true, I go, okay, yeah, let's see what you got. Right? That's not the end. That's the setup. So that's their assumption. Let's see what you got. Show me your argument for the rest of reality then. Right? Because that's, again, not the point. The point is, what is reality? So that's just, tiny setup to it. So yeah, they may want an explanation, but I would just say that's typically not really how discourse or discussion or argumentation works. You let them set up their assumptions and you show them why they're wrong. So another thing, right? Someone, again, I saw this. So if you ever watch like YouTube or hear these stories, you might find these videos called like, deconstruction videos, or people are deconstructing their faith, saying like, well, I used to be a Christian and now I'm not, and here's the reasons why. And I watched one not too long ago, and it was, I can't remember what, he was in a Christian band, like a big one. They toured, they released records, the whole thing. So it was a big, famous Christian band. He was one of the members. I can't remember what he did. So you'd think like, he was a pretty good, solid faith, right? He's touring the world, telling people about, God through these songs. Well, he is no longer a Christian today. And the reason, he said, was he went to Uganda and he saw people suffering. And he said, well, then there can't be a God because these people are suffering. Okay. Now, again, my question to anyone who says that would be, what are the cosmological implications of people suffering in Uganda? And the answer is, there are no cosmological implications to that, right? It may have some, it could be an interesting question into the nature of God, the plans of God, the intentions of God. It has nothing at all to say about how the universe began. So you couldn't say, well, because they're suffering, there's no God. What if God is like Loki from, like you see in the Marvel movies or like the Norse religion? What if that's God? And he's playing tricks on the people of Uganda and he's having a hoot of a time, right? I mean, I don't believe that, right? But from some sense, like you can't conclude that because they're suffering, therefore billions of years ago, God didn't make the earth or the universe, right? This event is billions of years too late to have anything to say about the origin, right? Again, it's an interesting philosophical idea about maybe the nature of God, but it has nothing to do about the origin of the universe, right? The present state of Uganda today in 2022 has no bearing on how the universe was made. I hope we can see that, right? But again, this idea comes up a lot, right? Another example I know, a friend of mine, his parents were getting a divorce, okay? And they went to church. His parents were getting a divorce. And the church said to him, look, you're getting a divorce. We don't think it's right for you to be teaching the kids ministry anymore. Okay, now, you may think the church was right or wrong in that decision, but his reaction was, fine, I don't believe in God anymore. But now think about it, like, so someone says something to you that you thought was a little mean or hurtful, or whatever it is. And again, I'm not gonna make any judgment of whether it was right or wrong or mean or hurtful, it doesn't really matter. The point is, he then said, well, I guess that in terms of the cosmological origin, there actually was no necessary being. Those two have nothing to do with each other, right? They're not related at all. But again, the vast majority of objections you'll get to the existence of God are these things that I say, like, they happened billions of years too late to actually have any implication on cosmology, on how the universe began. So whether it's suffering in Uganda or your own life, or, again, like I shared the story of my mom, right? This happens, though. People have a tragedy and they say, like, oh, I can't believe in God. How could, God do this, right? That's an interesting question in terms of maybe your relationship with God or the nature of God, maybe. But again, it has nothing to do with the cosmological origin. But most objections you're going to get go along these lines. Another one I hear is, well, the Bible can't be true because there are multiple religions in the world. Which, again, really makes no sense even from the sense of like, we don't apply this to anything else, right? Like, well, no, I'm not going to vote for any political party because there's multiple political parties. So now that none of them are right. I mean, I guess in the sense, no, none of them are absolutely right. Okay, but we get this idea, like we don't apply this kind of logic. Like if there are multiple options, then all of them are wrong. No, sometimes one is true and the other ones are false. Like we understand this very well and very intuitively. It doesn't come up in any other context except somehow religion and God, right? And again, even if somehow that was a valid argument, it still wouldn't matter because those religions are still, their first adherents or formations on this planet were still billions of years too late, right? God either already made the universe or he didn't, right? So when the time those, earthly adherents to those religions came up onto the scene, it still has nothing to say about the cosmological origin. And so what I would say is if anyone ever says, like, well, I don't believe in God because, Uganda or this, that, you can maybe ask, like, what are the cosmological implications of that belief? Now, well, or you could just say, like, yeah, or you could try to get them to see that, like, are you saying that, if a tragedy exists, then billions of years ago, God couldn't have made the universe? Like, we don't really conceive of time working backwards in causality, right? Hopefully that didn't just confuse it even further, but right, we conceive of time flowing one direction, cause, effect. Okay, it was not like, yeah, billions of years later, my mom died, therefore God never created the world, the universe, right? And if my mom had continued to live, then God retroactively would have actually still made the universe, right? Of course not, okay? Okay, we're coming up on the end, so I'm gonna do last quick couple things. Any questions about cosmological origin, the idea of building up an argument from there? Just origin of the universe? Yeah, origin of the universe, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, we're 2 or 3 classes. We're gonna go deep into it all. Yeah. it's exciting. Yeah. Well, and again, the exciting part for me is that I keep having more. Like I said, when I did the class before, I had 7 arguments. Now I have 9 since teaching it last time. Because science and stuff keeps advancing, and they keep, like I say, they're doing their job for me. They're proving things for me, so it makes it easy. Okay, so now again, thinking of perhaps our objector here, saying, okay, fine, you've got Pascal's wager, it's rational. Fine, I guess science can't explain everything, but still, if you want me to believe in God, you need to prove it. Okay, they'll say. Now again, we could say, well, by Godel's incompleteness theorem, it probably can't be proven. I think that's a very, true thing. I don't think you could prove it, right? If you could prove God within the context and confines of our universe, then that would seem like a very weak artificial God, because how could we use the rules of our system to explain something outside of it? Okay, so right off the bat, I don't think it's true. But even if somehow that was possible, I think we should ask, why do we need to prove it? And what I mean by that is, we are familiar with how a court works, okay? And if you go to a court, does someone's guilt have to be proven 100% absolutely? No, proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But actually, I think the analogy is actually even worse for the objector, because in a civil trial, you have to prove only the balance of probabilities. Is it more likely than not? And I think this is actually how we should approach this. Is it more likely that God exists or not? We don't have to prove it mathematically beyond a reasonable doubt, but if it's more likely, we should believe that thing. I think this is fairly intuitive, right? We should probably all try to believe things that are more likely than not in all things, right? Now, again, I think by Pascal's wager, even if it's unlikely, it's still optimal to believe it. But again, let's think about this. Like, more likely than not. Well, again, we have 9 upcoming arguments that I think make it extremely likely. Again, literally the best arguments I have heard, I have just debunked for you a second ago. Like, I believe in evolution, there's suffering. Like, literally, if you find a good argument, please, I would love to hear it. I have tried. I'll watch these videos on YouTube of these very well-regarded atheists, and they'll say, these are my 3 reasons I don't believe in God. Number 1, evolution. I was like, oh, come on, man. Give me something interesting. I want to understand the objections on the other side. I literally cannot find a good one. So if you find a good one, please let me know so I can think about it. I would really appreciate that. But really, it comes down to this, every time, it's the same kind of weird objection, suffering, okay? So I think even just looking at balance of probabilities, we have so many reasons. But in fact, I think there's something we can think about even beyond that. There is a lawyer, a Christian, an apologist, and his name is Abdu Murray. And he was a Muslim, and he came to believe in God through Ravi Zacharias Ministries. Obviously, he's a little fallen from grace these days, but obviously, he's had some good impacts, I suppose, in his ministry. And so he's a lawyer, and what he said is, look, when you have a trial in court, it's not necessarily the outcome of the event that causes the type of trial. It's sort of the circumstances involved, okay? So if someone murders someone is dead, right? This is a criminal trial now, and you have to try to convict this person beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? If someone dies through accident, okay, someone is still dead. In both cases, someone is dead. This is not a criminal trial, right? This is a civil trial. It's a wrongful death suit, maybe to pay millions of dollars, okay? But we have this high bar beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal trial, because if you get it wrong, then someone will be in jail, or maybe, depending on jurisdiction, killed, executed, okay? So the consequences for being wrong are dire. So you really want to make sure you've got it right. Because if you get it wrong, bad things will happen. In a wrongful death civil trial, if you get the judgment wrong, someone may have to pay a lot of money. It's still better than them being executed. Okay, so we see that the type of trial, the burden of proof, is not necessarily relevant or related to what happened, but due or related to the consequences of a wrongful judgment. Okay. Now I ask you this. In the court case, as it were, between do we believe in God or do we not believe in God, if the Christian is wrong, okay, what dire consequence befalls the skeptic? Nothing, right? We all just die and become worm food. Nothing bad befalls them, right? So in terms of a court analogy, this would not be a high burden of proof because the consequences of being wrong are not they're not bad at all. They're nothing. Flip it. If the skeptic convinces someone to abandon their faith and they are wrong, what are the consequences of the person who abandoned their faith? Well, according to Pascal's wager, negative infinity, right? This bad consequences. So in terms of a legal analogy, who should have the high burden of proof? The skeptic, right? Because if they're wrong, the consequences are dire as it gets. So if someone asks you to prove the existence of God, first you say, by Gödel's incompleteness theorem, we probably can't, okay? Number two, in terms of like a balance of probabilities, it's far more likely with my 9+ arguments that we're going to go over that and that it is true. But number three, really it's the skeptic who should have the high burden of proof, because if they're wrong, like in a court of law, bad results. Okay, so I think this is many different ways we can look at this through this court analogy. So again, is faith rational? Well, according to legal system, legal jurisprudence, mathematics, statistics, decision theory, sort of ideas of knowability, right? In logic, on and on and on and on. We're seeing now tonight already in one class, like 6 different ways of viewing the world and coming to the conclusion that faith is rational and the disbelief in it is quite irrational. How much time do we have left? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, one last thing. You had asked earlier, or the statement, Jesus' resurrection is preposterous, someone might say. And so you ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, that's a miracle, and miracles don't exist. Okay, well, let's think about that. Let's break this down. We're going to look at this, and we're going to do this a lot in this class. We're going to break this down into propositional logic. This is a branch of mathematics dealing with propositions, which are just statements, okay? So someone will say, if the Bible is true, so if B for Bible, then miracles are true. If the Bible is true, then miracles are true. I think that's not very controversial, right? Even someone who doesn't believe the Bible could read the Bible and understand that if the Bible's true, that follows logically. They will say to you, well, of course we know that miracles are not true. In logic, this is the symbol for not. Okay, miracles are not true, they say. And then there is a rule of logic called the law of the contrapositive. You don't need to necessarily worry about the name, but the point being is if you ever have something that looks like this, if something, then something, it's also true that not this thing implies not that thing. Okay, so for example, if I am in Ridge Church, then I'm in Maple Ridge. Okay, but so that's if I'm in Ridge Church, then I'm in Maple Ridge. If I'm not in Maple Ridge, well, I'm sure definitely not in Ridge Church. Do you see? So if you flip it, if you flip the not and the arrow like this is also equally true. Okay, so the rules of logic, we get this. And then by another rule of logic, we know that if miracles are not true, and if miracles are not true, then the Bible's not true, then the Bible's not true. And this is what someone, when they say to you, well, Jesus didn't rise from the dead because miracles are not true, this is essentially what they mean in propositional logic. But it helps us to break it down because then we can start to think to ourselves, well, wait a minute, okay, this is valid logic. They followed all the rules of logic. And yet, this one is a bit suspicious because you just assumed it, right? Like this one we get from reading the Bible. This one we get just from, transforming this one by the rule of logic. But how did they get this one? You might wonder. Well, let's think about this. Kind of a sub-argument over here. If miracles are true, then we know that God exists, right? Again, I don't think that's controversial. We know that God doesn't exist, so they would argue. Again, by that same rule of logic, we know that if God doesn't exist, then miracles don't exist. And our conclusion, God doesn't exist, therefore, there are no miracles. And so it's by this unspoken little bit of logic that they conclude this, that they then plug into this. But you see what they've done? They've assumed that God doesn't exist. So their argument boils down to, assuming God doesn't exist, the Bible's not true. Well, that's not any brilliant observation. Of course that's the case. If God doesn't exist, the Bible's not true. Yes, that's very apparent. But do you see that what we've done is basically take the statement, well, miracles don't exist, and we've unpacked it to show the hidden assumptions in there, right? And again, this is valid logic. But the assumptions raise some basically self-contradictions, because it doesn't profit you anything to assume God doesn't exist and then conclude the Bible's false, right? That is just obvious, right? Again, you've sort of assumed the conclusion, as I've mentioned, you see? So this is kind of what I mean when you say, like, if someone says, well, it's preposterous that Jesus rose from the dead. You're saying, why? Why do you think that? And I think what we can show is if they actually work out the unspoken logic of it, we will see that actually their logic is contradictory and flawed. And again, that's logical, okay? But again, even from a scientific standpoint, right? It is very scientifically well understood that, you know, so for example, someone will say, well, miracles break the laws of physics, let's say, so it can't be true. But again, it's very well understood in science that within any isolated system, okay, you know, like for example, the sum total of all the energy in there is constant. But people can put energy into the system, right? And so in our reality, it's true that within the system, miracles cannot happen. But if energy is input from outside the system, this is a very well understood scientific principle in all systems. So miracles are not only, we see that the objection is logically fallacious, it scientifically has no grounding, because we understand this to be very well done science in every other system, right? So the objection that miracles are preposterous, I think, breaks down very quickly once you analyze it from almost any direction. Any questions about this propositional logic? All good? I think we probably are at 9 o'clock exactly on the dot now. So we'll show more of stuff like this throughout the class. Again, so propositional logic is just a branch of mathematics. But again, hopefully, I think we've seen a couple things tonight. One, when we look at the cosmological origin, we start to clear a lot of these weird objections that really have just no bearing. And we start to form a foundation to show that faith is logical, whether you look at it through, again, mathematics, statistics, you know, propositional logic, decision theory, the legal system, almost any avenue you look at it, you come to the conclusion that faith is rational by any definition of rational, right? So yeah, I hope this was beneficial. I hope I didn't go too fast. I'm recording this so I can send it out and you can watch it. Maybe just to finish, I'll just say a prayer and then we can head out. And if anyone has any questions, I'll stay. You can come ask me and happy to keep talking. It gives my wife a break from me telling her all this stuff. She's sick of it. So I want to just pray quickly for us. Heavenly Father, thank you, God, for this night and for everyone who's able to attend. And I just thank you for creating a universe that's comprehensible and for us with minds that we can comprehend it, God. This really is an amazing gift that you've given us. You haven't left us adrift in a universe alone, but you've given us minds to comprehend you, to comprehend this universe. And even, as your word says in Romans, since the beginning, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. We just thank you for your revelation. We thank you for your truth. We thank you for your son, Jesus Christ, who makes all of this worthwhile. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Again, thank you so much. I have a lot of fun doing this, so it's just a pleasure to be able to talk about it. And like I said, I'll see you next week for Arguments for the Existence of God, Class 1. If you have any other questions, please come on up and I'm happy to chat more. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm, mhm.
love the
Mhm.
people around you, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And you die, and God doesn't exist. But what you lose,
Yeah.
I heard that one.
if you believe that God doesn't exist, and you do all the bad things, God exists, but you
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's yeah.
That's-
Yeah. That's exactly. Yes. That's right. That's the whole. Yeah. That's the logic. Yeah. And you know, it's funny. I was again listening to an atheist philosopher speak recently, and I don't know if do you know Sean McDowell, son of Josh McDowell, like the famous Christian author. So Sean McDowell was interviewing him, and he said, as an atheist, is there anything that gives you pause? Like, well, maybe atheism isn't true. And this guy said, well, yeah, there's two. One is consciousness. We'll get into that a little bit. And one is, it seems that belief in God leads to good outcomes, people behaving in good ways, in ways that atheism has no answer or counter for. So look, kind of you're saying, even if God's doesn't exist, a belief in him seems to produce the kind of society that we all want, which is, again, a pretty good reason to believe anyway then, right?
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if not, we got other ways.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. 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 Ah.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. Hope to see you next week. Yeah.
There'll be a quiz on the theorem.
That's a really good question. So experience. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. No, for sure. I totally understand. It's really interesting because, you know, so there's actually a branch of sort of philosophy, even looking at, is the experience of the Holy Spirit a valid philosophical argument for belief in God? And there are some philosophers, like if you know Dr. William Lane Craig, is a very famous Christian philosopher and apologist. Alvin Plantinga, we'll talk more about him as well. They have whole big books devoted to this idea that the experience of the Holy Spirit is a valid argument for truth and for belief. But there is this weird kind of middle ground because, again, we can look at the idea of like, well, what is knowable? We look at the idea of like knowability. So if we have an experience, are we sure that other people are perceiving the same experience that we're experiencing in the same way, right? So then it gets a little weird. Like, again, is it just our perception of that experience, which would kind of be an opinion? Is it somehow a universally shared and agreed upon experience? Like kind of I mentioned, like it's historical truth that we're all here. I mean, I think, yes, for sure. Like that one. Okay, you're very welcome. Yeah, thanks. That one I think is sort of like raises to the level of contingent truth because we can probably all agree on it. But I mean, maybe someone would say, well, no, that's not true because, you know, none of us exist. You're actually not here. Again, you're a brain in a jar somewhere, right? So there, yeah. So there is this interesting middle ground where you do have to wonder, like, yeah, or kind of like, you know, like Descartes and stuff, like, is what you're experiencing real? So I'd say like there is some debate in philosophy about the validity of experience in terms of understanding truth. And, you know, equally convinced philosophers, Christian and non, disagree. Some think like, yes, experience is just as valid as mathematics. And some say, no, not at all. Sure. Sure.
I mean, I just think it's in terms of the continuum.
Mm-hmm.
Opinion factors in.
Mm-hmm.
Then somehow they had to have some experience that formed that.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, usually, probably. And I think that is, you know, possibly, again, maybe why in some ways experience and opinion are kind of the same thing, because they're sort of interrelated, right? Like your experiences inform your opinions may inform how you perceive something, which is essentially how you experience it. So in some level, those are kind of just kind of the same term, you know, it kind of goes circular like that. Yeah.
Cool. See you next
Good. Okay, perfect. Yeah. See you next week. Good night.